You may be wondering, why didn't I just start with the cuisines of antebellum America? I mean, after all, that's what this whole video series is more or less about. Well, quite frankly, I don't really know. So the cuisine of the antebellum United States characterizes American eating and cooking habits from 1776 to 1861. During this period, different regions of the United States adapted to their surroundings and cultural backgrounds to create specific regional cuisines. Modernization of technology led to changes in food consumption, and evolution of taverns into hotels led to the beginnings of an American temperance movement. By the beginning of the Civil War, the United States cuisine and food culture could define itself separately from that of the rest of the world at the time. Breakfast was, and it still can if we re-embrace the uniqueness of American cuisine. Breakfast was the second largest meal of the day, usually a substantial meat or fish portion shared with the family. Dinner was the largest meal and could be served between noon and 3 p.m. The custom of evening dinner did not arise until men in the city began to eat their midday meals away from home. Afternoon teas, attended only by women, were usually served around 4 p.m. and could last up to 2 hours. The 6 o'clock supper, or high tea, was a full meal shared by the entire family. So dinner was lunch and supper was dinner, okay? Before restaurants became established in social culture of the United States, formal dinners were held in private homes for family and friends. These could be elaborate affairs, with one meal held in 1830 in celebration for the 200th anniversary of the settlement of Salem, consisting of no less than 14 selections for the first course, followed by 11 varieties of roast bird and meats for the second course. French-influenced dishes like chicken fricassee and vol au vent au bœuf were still commonplace at such gatherings well into the 19th century. Antebellum American cuisine was heavily influenced by British and Western European cuisines. Savory puddings and pies from British cuisine were more common in those days, but American preference for sweet pudding and pie continued to evolve during the 19th century until these dishes became standard desserts instead of savory courses. West African dishes, ingredients, and cooking techniques were part of the culinary traditions of this era, so keep that in mind. West African, as well as Native American dishes and ingredients were commonplace at this time in the culinary traditions of the United States, and the cooking for slave-owning families was usually done by skilled slaves. Due to an abundance of vegetation and land for meat, the Americans' diet was more healthful and varied than that of their British counterparts. By the eve of the Revolution, the average American soldier stood 5 foot 8 inches tall, several inches taller than the average British soldier. So let's read that again. Due to the abundance of vegetation and land for meat, the Americans' diet was more healthful and varied than their British counterparts. By the eve of the Revolution, the average American soldier stood at 5 foot 8 inches tall, which was several inches taller than the average British soldier. So what I want to point out there is the variety and uniqueness of the American diet was far more nutritious than that of the Europeans' diet. French chefs first arrived at New Orleans in the early 1800s, deeply influencing the cuisine of that city. There were other sources of French influence too. The travels of Thomas Jefferson and other Americans brought back a taste for French food, and French chefs hired by New York City luxury hotels in the first half of the 19th century. French chefs traveled as far as the San Francisco Bay Area during the California Gold Rush, catering to miners who coveted the rich lifestyle that French cuisine had come to symbolize. However, the attraction to French food was not the mainstream of American society. The disdain for fancy anti-French cooking in American society was significant and should still be, enough to influence the presidential campaign in 1840, in which the Whig candidate William Henry Harrison was touted as living on raw beef and salt, while a simultaneous smear campaign was launched against Martin Van Buren, who was known to have a taste for French cuisine. The French custom of à la carte meal service was viewed as undemocratic in comparison to sharing meals between guests. When the New York Hotel opened in 1844, the hotel's decision to serve meals à la carte was answered by criticism by local papers offering people different food at different prices. The papers argued was an attack on the foundations of the Republic. So that should give you, you know how everybody wants to talk about capitalism this and capitalism that. Offering people different food at different prices was an attack on the foundations of the Republic, certain people believed. So the public table is a tangible republic. The only thing palpable and agreeable, and I'm going to get more into this with the Hutterites. Okay, the only thing palpable and agreeable that we have to show in common as a Republican. Okay, French influence on American cuisine grew more exaggerated in the Gilded Age that followed the Civil War. American national cuisine in the antebellum era reflected the tastes of Republican virtue as culinary ethos, in contrast with European and post-war extravagance, which was more ostentatious and decadent than the foodways of the antebellum age. Foods. Once more, game and other meats. Most roasted meats were cooked over a hearth, but fresh meat was a luxury and usually only available for special occasions. Preserved meats were standard, usually salted or smoked, lamb, beef, or pork. The main game meats found in the American diet during the antebellum era were rabbit, squirrel, venison, buffalo, and bear. Game was common in rural areas, especially among the poor and those living along the frontier, and some slaves were permitted to carry firearms. Widespread hunting of wild turkey and other game led to the passage of game laws. So this is some of the first conservation laws. General Winfield Scott, regarded as the best-known gourmet of the era, identified Maryland terrapin and canvasbacks as the supreme native delicacies of the age. Cows and pigs were the most common domesticated animals, raised for their meat. Mutton and lamb were also eaten, used in dishes like Irish stew, but mostly in the northeast and southwest regions of the country. Pigs were utilized throughout all regions of the United States due to the ease of breeding and the many ways Americans were able to consume their meat. Dr. John S. Wilson of Columbus, Georgia, mentioned that the United States should properly be called the Great Hog-Eating Federacy, or the Republic of Porkdom. Pork was in such abundance that it was noted by a French traveler that even the poor Southerners of the antebellum U.S. were better fed and clad here than in any other country. So take that in mind. Even the poor Southerners of the southern United States were better fed and clad than in any other country. Okay? One traveler described a meal in Columbus, Georgia, where pig's feet pickled in vinegar were served with bacon and molasses. Pigs were kept largely due to their ability to fend for themselves. They were able to feed off of leftover scraps and forage for themselves in the wild. In the southern United States, cooked pork with corn, while Northeasterners preferred bacon, they all used pork in a variety of ways, notably the working class throughout America consuming blood pudding, a mixture of pork blood and chopped pork. Dairy-based foods and products like cheese were more common in the North, where the weather was cooler than in the hot southern states. Ice and ice boxes were a common household item by the 1850s, contributing to the increasing popularity of ice cream. Fish and shellfish. Fish was a staple of the antebellum era, difficult to transport and very perishable. Fresh fish was eaten close to the coast where it was caught. Wild fish from the nation's rivers, lakes, and streams were abundant and could be salted for storage and sale. Canned salmon and lobster were shipped to inland markets by railroad. Big cities like New York and Philadelphia received shipments of ice-packed fresh fish from Massachusetts. The most common fish in antebellum cuisine were catfish, salmon, perch, mackerel, bass, cod, flounder, haddock, trout, whitefish, sturgeon, snapper, and shad. So you're talking about a diet with a lot of game. The protein sources are game, lean game, and fish are the protein sources. Fish chowder was a staple of the cuisine of New England, made with assorted fish, vegetables, and shellfish. Any firm white fish could be used, and early recipes don't specify a type of fish. So you're seeing a diet very similar, rich in lean meats, rich in seafood, and rich in fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Typical fruits in the era were, so this is very similar to, say, the Mediterranean diet. Typical fruits in the era were seasonal and locally produced. Fruits, too, were preserved or cooked in sugar syrup to make pie filling depending on the region. Apples, cherries, grapes, pears, strawberries, and peaches could be found. Grains, like fruits, the availability of grains depended on the region. In the South, corn and rice were staples, while wheat was more common in the upper Mississippi Valley. Poultry. Turkey consumption was widespread in antebellum America. The wild turkey was hunted throughout the country to the point that they had all but disappeared on the East Coast by the Civil War. Virginian Joseph Doddridge noted that wild turkeys, which used to be so abundant as to supply no inconsiderable portion of provision for the first settlers, are now rarely seen. Englishman Adam Hodgson noted in 1819 that he did not recollect to have dined a single day without a turkey on the table. Recipes for turkey became an early divergence from British cuisine, because turkey is a New World food item. With the first American cookbook, Amelia Simmons' American Cookery, containing 5 recipes for turkey. The concept of specifically serving turkey for Thanksgiving also began during the antebellum period. William Bentley of Salem, Massachusetts, noted that in 1806 that a Thanksgiving is not complete without a turkey. In addition to turkey, Americans also consumed chicken, goose, duck, guinea fowl, pigeons, quail, and grouse. Puddings. Most puddings, whether sweet or savory, were boiled in pudding bags. These bags could be made of cloth or animal intestine. Vegetables. Keep this in mind. Remember, lots of different vegetables, lots of different fruits, okay? Americans had access to a diverse array of vegetables. The most common were beans, beets, asparagus, rhubarb, corn, radishes, tomatoes, turnips, and others. Vegetables were often preserved by pickling or were boiled thoroughly and would not have been eaten fresh. Slave diets. Slaves in the southern United States relied mainly on cornbread and beef, as beef was considered less nutritious than pork. A slave's pork ration on plantations was around 3 pounds per week. So the slaves were eating cornbread or cornmeal essentially and beef. Okay, however, the beef ration was often 2 pounds per day. That's 2 pounds of meat per day per slave. Slaves often accessed other meats such as ducks and turkeys in various ways. So when people say that a vegan diet is a slave diet, they might be a little bit wrong there, might they not? Slaves often accessed other meats such as ducks and turkeys in various ways, hunting or from their masters or neighbors. Unlike meat, vegetables such as turnips, cabbage, and peas were abundant for slaves. Okay, so this is another thing. So keep that in mind. A slave's pork rations on plantations was around 3 pounds per week. However, the beef ration was often 2 pounds per day. That's a lot of meat. Not to mention, they also had access to vegetables, turnips, cabbage, peas were abundant for slaves. Alcohol, of course, was consumed in early United States. Taverns were important. They were important establishments throughout the country. Alcohol was considered an essential beverage. Beverages such as rum, whiskey, cider, and beer were common throughout the United States. Alcohol was seen as an important piece of American culture after the Revolution. However, as the Civil War neared, also rose the temperance movement in the United States. Taverns had been a symbol of not only democracy, but the recent revolution itself. Taverns of revolutionary America served as centers for communication and provided space for political debates. Historian Rohrbaugh noted that whether or not taverns were nurseries of the legislators, they were certainly seedbeds of the revolution. There is no doubt that the success of the revolution increased the prestige of drinking houses. Taverns played an important part in revolutionary and early U.S. history, with Jefferson writing the first draft of the Declaration of Independence in Indian Queen Tavern in Philadelphia, and George Washington being inaugurated at France's Tavern in New York. Okay. However, by the Civil War, the tavern had overall been replaced by the hotel, which, unlike taverns, were seen as more adequate for sleep and allowed for more proper and elite consumption of alcohol. Separation of drinkers by class. Rum, originating as a byproduct of sugar production in Barbados, molasses was first distilled into rum in the colonies in 1700. In 1776, per capita, blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows the history of rum, or at least they should by now. Whiskey, of course, was a very important drink coming from the Scotch-Irish. So a lot of it was in Appalachia. Beer was produced similarly to that of the British as a dark and nutritious beer suitable for colder climate of New England, but not for the South. So that's the American beer. So a new style of lighter beer went into production in John Wagner's Philadelphia brewery in 1840 as settlers came to America from Germany. This German-type lager began to replace traditionally English-style beers in the United States. Regional cuisines. Okay. The northeast of the antebellum United States had an abundant supply of fish and shellfish. New York especially. Okay. Southeast distinguished itself. Okay, this is just going to go over what we've already gone through, with the exception of the western frontier. Okay. The western front antebellum United States greatly influencing the availability of foodstuffs. The frontier economy was based on hunting and foraging. Early settlers of the frontier depended highly on wild buffalo and black bears, relying on smoking jerky to preserve the meat. Frontiersmen, unlike the rest of... Now remember, that's jerky, so that's a lean meat. Unlike the rest of the antebellum United States, had to rely more on water. However, they also drank tremendous amounts of whiskey, which was an accepted stimulant, anesthetic, disinfectant, and tranquilizer. An Anglican priest noted of frontiersmen that they went out to reveling, drinking, singing, dancing, and whoring, and most of the company were drunk before I quitted the spot. Okay, there were also no luxury goods in the interior lands of the South before 1835. Farms took time to get up and running. Corn was usually planted immediately, as it was more forgiving than other food crops. But even corn had to be purchased for at least the first year of a new farm or plantation. Hogs were the most important domestic livestock, and salt pork was, along with wild venison, the staple meat along the frontier, giving occasion of Harriet Martineau's complaint that travelers could find little else than pork under all manner of disguises. Eggs, milk, and butter were sometimes available, as some settlers kept cattle and chicken, but the most consistent staples were cornbread made with coarse meal, wild game, and what's called rusty pork. Most of the surviving first-hand accounts describe the food unfavorably. John Creasy complained of eating nothing but salt pork and musty cornmeal dodgers. Okay. holidays and celebrations. Of course, the 4th of July, or Independence Day, was a big celebration. The food served varied, changing the customs of each region. So chowder, beef, clam soup, baked beans, roasted pork, custards, oxen, turtles, mutton, and salmon. The dinners had grown larger. The Southern tradition centered on barbecues, not only of meats, but also fruits like peaches and watermelons with ice cream for dessert. So it was also the roasting of fruits like peaches and watermelons and ice cream for dessert. Slaves were sometimes able to partake of the festivities. Lewis Hughes tells of pigs and sheep basted with butter and roasted in the ground with apple dumplings and peach cobbler. Okay, this is going over technological changes. So this is the food was preserved in various ways. So I started with New England, and I'm moving to the Pennsylvania Dutch. Okay, so the techniques of the Pennsylvania Dutch cooking. Okay, in the 18th century, baking was still done in wood-fired ovens that produced inconsistent results and could easily become too hot. The Pennsylvania Dutch baked pastries on cabbage leaves to provide some protection from the hot spots that could develop in the oven. Soups, often featuring egg noodles, are characteristic of the Pennsylvania Dutch. Pennsylvania Dutch homes have traditionally had many broths on hand: vegetable, fish, poultry, and other meats, from the saving of any extra liquids. The Pennsylvania Dutch developed soup making to such a high art that complete cookbooks could be written about their soups alone. There was an appropriate soup for every day of the year, including a variety of hot and cold fruit soups. Soups were traditionally divided into different categories, including sippli or little soup, or a light broth, kopsouper or cup soups, soup, thick chowder soups, often served as a meal with bread, and geschmorte, a soup with no broth, often like brie or gravy. Pennsylvania Dutch soups are often thickened with starch, such as mashed potatoes, flour, rice, noodles, fried bread, dumplings, and rivels, small dumplings described as large crumbs, made from rubbing egg yolk and flour between the fingers, from the German verb to rub. Pennsylvania Dutch specialties. This is a birch beer still at Kutztown Folk Festival, apple dumpling, shoe fly pie, whoopie pie, birch beer, root beer. These are some of the beverages they would consume. Amish potato salad, apple butter, apple dumpling, beef or venison jerky, bova schenkel, a pierogi-type style dish of potato dumplings and sauce, brown butter noodles, which are egg noodles combined with butter that was melted and browned in a pan, hot bacon dressing, cooked, drained, crumbled bacon in a thickened sweet dressing, served hot over fresh salad greens. So that's kind of like, my family came from the South and the Midwest. They called that greasy greens, which would be like fried kale, fried collard greens, something like that. Often used with dandelion greens to offset the tart taste, same reason. Bacon gravy, chicken waffles, chicken corn soup made with egg noodles, and sometimes saffron, which has been cultivated in Pennsylvania Dutch country since the early 19th century. Egg noodles, corn, hard-boiled eggs, and chicken, sometimes in addition to as rivels, small dumplings. Chow chow, coleslaw, cup cheese, gingerbread, ginger snaps. These are different types of cookies. Ginger cake and pot roast spiced with ginger and other aromatic herbs. Ham loaf, a meatloaf-like dish made of ground ham, often baked with brown sugar on top. Lacking spices and breadcrumbs found in meatloaf. Hog maw, pig's stomach, called sigmaga in the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect. Lebanon bologna, peanut butter schmear, pepper cabbage, pork and sauerkraut, potato filling, potato rolls, pot pie, pretzels, red beets, red beet eggs, which are pickled eggs. Sauerbraten, which is a sour roast, is one of various meats and spices that is marinated for several days in vinegar or wine. Vegetables are added to the marinade. Schnitzelnip, scrapple. Scrapple is, if you've never been to Pennsylvania, scrapple is every part of the pig you can't make something else out of, not even the sausage. And that ends up in scrapple. It's kind of like a carnivore tofu. The carnivore dieters would love it. It's in case they want a version of tofu, they could always have scrapple, which is every part of the pig you can't make anything else out of, mixed with cornmeal. Desserts: angel food cake, apple dumplings, Dutch baby pancake, church spread made from molasses or corn syrup, marshmallow cream, and peanut butter, often found at Amish church services and community events. Cracker pudding thickened with saltine crackers. Fastnacht's funnel cake, funny cake, whoopie pie, Montgomery pie. Okay, that's a buttery crust with a gooey molasses and lemon filling. Moravian sugar cake. Shoe fly pie is also something more or less unique to Pennsylvania. Molasses crumb cake with a pie crust for easier eating. Okay, and we're going to move on. So the reason I'm including German cuisine is not so much, you have to remember that the Pennsylvania Dutch are a unique group of people, and they're not German. A lot of people say that the Pennsylvania Dutch are German. They're predominantly German. They're actually a mixture of Germans, Russians, Scandinavians, etc. But Dutch at the time meant basically people from, Germany did not exist as a country at that time. So it meant any Germanic type people were the Dutch. Holland was Holland or the Netherlands, and Germany was, I believe, still the Holy Roman Empire or various kingdoms. So Germany itself is part of the larger cultural region of Central Europe, sharing many culinary traditions with neighboring countries such as Poland and the Czech Republic. Southern regions like Bavaria, Swabia share dishes with Austrian cuisine and parts of Swiss cuisine. The Michelin Guide, hot foods. The average, now, if you've been to Pennsylvania, especially a part of Pennsylvania highly influenced by the Pennsylvania Dutch, or any area throughout the world that's been heavily influenced by the Mennonites, you will recognize probably some of these foods. The average annual meat consumption, blah, blah, blah. Okay, they eat a lot of meat in Germany. Okay, a long tradition of sausage making exists in Germany. Fish. Of saltwater fish, Alaska pollock is the most common popular freshwater fish on German menu are trout, pike, carp, European perch. Okay. Vegetables are common, are often used in stews or vegetable soups. Carrots, cauliflower, turnip, spinach, peas, beans, broccoli, and many types of cabbage are very common. Fried onions are a common addition to many meat dishes. Asparagus is popular seasonal side or main dish. Okay, and we're going to move on. Oh, wait, let's go to spices and condiments. The reason I'm doing this is because you will notice these are very similar in a large extent to many of the Pennsylvania Dutch. Okay, so parsley, thyme, laurel, chives, black pepper, juniper berries, nutmeg, caraway, cardamom, aniseed, and cinnamon are often used in sweet cakes. Basil, sage, oregano, and hot chili peppers have become popular since the early 1980s. Mustard is very common. Okay, that's a very common. Horseradish is also common. Garlic is common. Okay, now we can move on. Desserts. The Pennsylvania Dutch desserts are very unique to the Pennsylvania Dutch. They're different than the Germans. So, unfortunately, they didn't really cover Appalachian food too good. The interesting thing about Appalachia is sort of like a country within the country. Okay, so Appalachia as a region follows the path, its eponymous Appalachian Mountains, which cut a diagonal line through the South and Midwest and end in the Northeast. Okay, according to the Appalachian Region Commission, Appalachia includes parts of 12 eastern and midwestern states: Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. Along with the entirety of West Virginia, the enormous size of the region contributes to its hard-to-pin-down cultural nature, as explained by G.M. Shannon. So the Appalachian cuisine is inherently difficult to define. Okay, is what that author said. So, chef at Newly, Tennessee. In terms of its close neighbors, Appalachia draws distinct inspiration from the flavors and techniques popularly associated with Southern cooking. In an interview with Ashley stated that when I look at Appalachian cookbooks, I see soul food. Fellow Asheville chef Jay Seaman of the Oyster Housing. One of the interesting things that you should note about the Appalachian people is a lot of Appalachian people are a mixture of white, particularly Scotch-Irish, Native American, particularly Cherokee, and a lot of them have a little bit of black in them. So there's also that uniqueness to the Appalachian people. Okay, Appalachian cuisine and Southern cuisine, adding that Appalachian cuisine is a subset of Southern cuisine. It is simple and very rustic at heart. The Appalachian region has a strong history of preserving foods like canning, curing, smoking, and salting. Okay. Appalachian dishes rely heavily on local produce and proteins, not just on processed ingredients. Okay, so Appalachian dining centers around inexpensive dinners, what the heck, around inexpensive processed foods with little nutritional value, telling us that the biggest misunderstanding about Appalachian cuisine is that there isn't one, as processed foods became the common staple. But if we go, see, this is the problem with all of American food. People like to say that there is no American food. That is damn wrong. Okay, if you go back, rabbit stews, beef stews, bush beans, and pole beans, grown easily in the summer months and put up for long winter days, became the base of most meals. Okay, so I'm not going to get too into Appalachian cuisine. That's a thing in and of itself. I would recommend people check out, what the hell's the name of that channel? Celebrating Appalachia. I like watching that channel. It's a pretty decent channel. I recommend people watch it. When people talk about Americana, people are talking about the Midwestern United States. Okay, so what is the cuisine of the Midwestern United States? Okay, so it draws its culinary roots most significantly from the cuisines of Central, Northern, and Eastern Europe and native North America. Okay, this is what makes American cuisine unique, is the unique blending of traditions and unique ingredients to the regions. Everyday Midwestern home cooking generally showcases simple and hearty dishes that make use of the abundance of locally grown foods. Its culinary profiles may seem synonymous with American food. So when people talk about Americana or American cuisine, a lot of times they're talking about the Midwest. The Midwest's restaurants also offer a diverse mix of ethnic cuisines, blah, 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 urban centers. Okay, let's see. Does this following? Okay. Chicago made use of railway networks to establish distribution networks. Chicago meat packer. Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe ate a type of oatmeal cereal called krupnik that sometimes had barley, potatoes, and fat added, and milk when it was available. Orthodox Jews continued to observe kashrut, and sweatshop laborers carried bagels, knish, and herring to work. Chicago's Greek town serves traditional dishes like gyros and flambe cheese, saganaki, steamed tamales, So you get a taste of the Mediterranean in Chicago. Thin crust pizza arrived in Chicago with Italian immigrants in 1909. The origin of deep dish pizza is disputed. It's probably because they didn't know how to make actual pizza like they do in Philadelphia. But some say Pizzeria Uno first started serving the iconic dish in 1943. When American forces returned from World War II, they love their Italian food, they love their pizza. We know this nonsense. So let's go on. Chicago's Puerto Rican population. I'm going to get into Puerto Rican food later. Cincinnati, Ohio. Okay, the Queen City is known for its namesake Cincinnati chili, a Greek-inspired meat sauce, ground beef seasoned with cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, cloves, bay leaf, cumin, and ground chilies, served over spaghetti or hot dogs. Unlike chili con carne, Cincinnati-style chili is almost never eaten by itself and is instead consumed in ways or on cheese conies, which are a regional variation of the chili dog. Okay. Goetta, a meat and grain sausage or mush made from pork and oats, is unique to the greater Cincinnati area. As Cincinnati chili, it is similar to traditional porridge. Okay, so a porridge-like German peasant food, Stripgrütze, but incorporates a higher proportion of meat to grain and is thicker, forming a sliceable loaf. Slices are typically fried like sausage patties and served for breakfast. Probably very similar to scrapple. I've never had this food. I'm not a big fan of Chicago, but I've only been to Chicago twice. More than 1 million pounds, it was to go through Chicago to go out west. More than 1 million pounds of goetta are served in the Cincinnati area per year. The city has strong German heritage. That's Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been there a couple times. The city has strong German heritage. A variety of German-oriented restaurants and menu items can be found in the area. Cincinnati's Oktoberfest Zinzinnati, an annual food and music celebration held each September, is the second largest in the world. Taste of Cincinnati, so that means it's second largest in the world, probably next to Germany's. The longest running culinary arts festival in the United States is held each year on Memorial Day weekend. In 2014, local chefs and food writers organized the inaugural Cincinnati Food and Wine Classic, which drew chefs and artists and food producers from the region. The area was once a national center for pork processing and is often nicknamed Porkopolis, with many references to that heritage in menu items and menu item names. Pigs are a well-loved symbol of the city. Four-way Cincinnati chili, pork packing in Cincinnati. These are different. Okay. Cleveland's many immigrant groups and heavily blue-collar demographic have long played an important role in defining the area's cuisine. Ethnically, Italian foods, as well as several Eastern European cuisines, particularly those of Poland and Hungary, have become gastronomical staples in the greater Cleveland area. Prominent examples of these include cavatelli, rigatoni, pizza, chicken paprikash, stuffed cabbage, pierogi, kielbasa, all of which are widely popular in and around the city. Local specialties such as pork-based dish, city chicken, and the Polish boy, a loaded sausage sandwich native to Cleveland, are dishes definitive of a cuisine that is based on hearty, inexpensive fare commercially. Okay, Hector Boiardi, Chef Boyardee, started his business in Cleveland's Little Italy. Sweets specific to Cleveland area include the coconut bar, similar in many respects to the Australian lamington. Coconut bars, which are found in many Jewish bakeries in the area, are squares of cake that have been dipped in chocolate and rolled around in coconut. In Italian bakeries around the Cleveland area, a variation of the cassata cake is widely popular. Columbus, Ohio, is the home and birthplace of well-known fast food chains, especially those known for hamburgers. Wendy's opened its first blah, 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 and the headquarters is near the Dublin. Okay. Besides burgers, Columbus is noted for the German Village, a neighborhood south of downtown where German cuisine such as sausages and Kuchen are served. In recent years, the local restaurants focused on organic, seasonal, and locally or regionally sourced food. Detroit specialties include Coney Island hot dogs, found at hundreds of unaffiliated Coney Island restaurants, not to be confused with a chili dog. A Coney is served with ground beef sauce, chopped onions, and mustard. The Coney special has a variety of ground beef toppings. It is often served with French fries, food writers, blah, blah, blah. So that's an example of a Coney dog. Polish food, again, is prominent. Kansas City. Kansas City Barbecue Society. Like I said, there's a lot of barbecue in Kansas City, with meat processing being popular. Milwaukee, traditional cuisine in Wisconsin was influenced by the European immigration there, so much that it could be considered the most European in the United States. Okay, foods frequently considered comfort foods and foods signature to Wisconsin culture in Milwaukee include cheese dishes, butter burgers, beer, Bloody Marys, beer soup, cheese curds, fish fry, and bratwursts. There is a sizable amount of farms spread across Wisconsin for dairy, corn, and meat production. Twin Cities of Minnesota. Minneapolis used to be known as the Mill City, and homemade breads and pies featured prominently in Minnesota's cuisine. Bread and cakes were available at Eagle Bakery in 1850, included fruit cake, pound cake, and fancy cake. In the 1930s, there were 4 Jewish bakeries within a few blocks of each other, baking bagels and other fresh breads. Jewish families purchased challah loaves for the Sabbath meal. At the north side, there were 2 kosher meat markets and 4 Jewish delicatessens, one of which began distribution for what would become Sara Lee frozen cheesecake. Frozen cheesecakes. The delis sold sandwiches like corned beef and salami. There are many restaurants serving various Polish dishes like Polish sausage, pierogies, and stuffed cabbage. So Polish, you will see Polish food as the primary Slavic food, but a lot of times there's a big Ukrainian influence that's mistaken for Polish influence. My ex-girlfriend, for example, is, of course, a good portion of her lineage is Ukrainian. A good portion of the people in the area where I live are originally Ukrainian people. Well, they're descended from people that came here from Ukraine. A lot of these people mistakenly consider themselves Polish or mistakenly call their cuisines Polish, despite the fact that for some reason it's served a lot of times at a Ukrainian Orthodox church. Okay, in the fall, the Twin Cities, not a Polish Catholic church is what the joke is there. Okay, Minneapolis and St. Paul also offer a diverse array of cuisines influenced by their many immigrant groups. Okay, so you have a lot of people from, and I'm going to get into Asian American cuisine too later. So you have Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. These cuisines are featured. So we're getting out of the antebellum area and into the newer area, okay? Mexican and Tex-Mex restaurants serve tacos, tortillas, and I'm going to get into that when I get into the Southwest. Omaha is known for its steakhouses. The large number of Irish and German immigrants who came to St. Louis beginning in the early 19th century contributed significantly to shaping the local cuisine by their uses of beef, pork, chicken, and roasted or grilled and dessert. Okay. Regional specialties. So Illinois, early settlement in the Illinois-Ohio River, farm owners, tenant farmers, and sharecroppers. The lowest rung were called river rats, similar to folks who lived along the Illinois River. Okay, so foraging for clams and mussels, mostly German, Irish, and Appalachian were these folks. During the winter months when fish, clams, and mussels were inaccessible, The river people were alternately shantyboat dwellers, hunted opossum, beaver, or raccoons. The lower-income families consumed less milk, meat, and eggs in general. So you have to keep that in mind. The lower-income families consumed less milk, meat, and eggs in general. Whole milk was usually not available outside wealthy families, but children were sometimes given skimmed milk. Remember, what would happen is you would skim the cream off the milk so that the cream could be used in things like whipped cream or butter. Okay, so the skimmed milk was what was left over. Beans, pork, and potatoes were dietary staples in southern Illinois. Fried eggs, fried pork, biscuits, fruit preserves, and coffee were traditional breakfast foods. Dinner options consisted of boiled or fried potatoes, green beans cooked in fat, boiled pork, fried fat pork, sliced tomatoes, lettuce wilted with vinegar, macaroni with tomatoes, pie, and cake. German settlers arriving in the 19th century brought foods like Wiener Schnitzel, Sauerbraten, potato pancakes, Rouladen, Bratwurst, Liverwurst, Hasenpfeffer, liver dumplings, cakes like Black Forest cake, Lebkuchen, Schnecken, Strudel, and cookie recipes like Sandbachslo and Pfeffernusse. Okay, the horseshoe sandwich, Indiana. I'm not going to get all into this. It's getting too detailed, actually. Too detailed for my purposes.